The sharp sound of a shoe hitting human flesh cut through the reception area like a slap. Madame Sophia's thin body flew backward. Her old knees hit the wet marble floor first, hard, then her palms, then her side. The blue mop bucket beside her tipped over, and foamy water rushed out like a small flood, spreading across the shiny floor. People gasped. A pen dropped. Someone whispered, "Jesus!" But the woman who caused it did not even blink. Sandra stood there in her expensive navy blue suit, her leather handbag hanging from her arm like she was on a runway, not in an office. Her face was twisted with anger and pride. She pointed one long finger at the old cleaner on the floor. "You, this lazy old woman," she snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You must be blind to splash that dirty water on me without looking. Do you know how much this dress cost, or the worth of this leather handbag?" Madame Sophia's lips shook. Water dripped from her gloves. Her eyes were already full of tears. Sandra laughed, cold and sharp. "Can any of your children afford this?" she continued. "I guess not. If they could, you would not be here at your old age cleaning floor and washing toilets." Madame Sophia tried to speak, but her voice came out like air. I'm sorry, Ma," she started. Before she could explain, Sandra lifted her leg again, like she wanted to kick her twice. 3 staff members nearby, 1 man and 2 women in corporate clothes, stood frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. They looked shocked, but none of them moved. Madame Sophia raised her hands in defense. "Please," she begged. Sandra's shoe hovered in the air, and then a calm voice rang out behind them. "Stop." Everyone turned at once. The glass doors at the entrance slid open quietly. 2 tall security men in black suits stepped in first. Their eyes scanned the room, alert and serious. Then a man walked in behind them. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dark brown skin, clean-shaven, wearing a simple but perfectly fitted dark suit that looked more expensive than anything in the building. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. Ben Johnson, the billionaire CEO of Johnson Holdings. The air in the reception area changed immediately, like somebody switched off the noise in the world. Even Sandra's smile faded for half a second. Ben's eyes landed on the wet floor, then on the tipped bucket, then on the old woman on the ground. Madame Sophia wiped her face with trembling fingers, trying to sit up with dignity, even though her body shook. Ben took 1 step forward, then another. His jaw tightened. He rushed to Madame Sophia and knelt beside her like the floor was not even wet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice shaking, not from fear, but from anger. Madame Sophia looked up slowly, and something flashed in her eyes. Pain, yes, but also strength. She took a deep breath. Ben held her arm gently, helping her sit. Then he looked around, sharp and dangerous. And he asked the question that made everyone's blood turn cold. "Mum, who did this to you?" Sandra's face went blank. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "Mum," she repeated in a whisper, like her brain refused to understand. Madame Sophia stared at Ben for a long moment. Then her eyes moved to Sandra, and she said softly, but clearly, "It was her." Sandra staggered back like someone pushed her. No, sir, it's not." She started quickly. "I mean, yes. But this old woman splashed dirty water on me. She ruined my dress." Ben stood up slowly. His calm face was now gone. In its place was something colder. "Old woman," he repeated, "you kicked my mother and you are still talking about your dress." Sandra's knees almost gave way. The staff members who had been frozen before now looked like they wanted the floor to open and swallow them. One of the women whispered, "She's the CEO's mother." Another whispered back, "God have mercy." Sandra forced a laugh, thin and shaky, like laughing could save her. "She said she's your mother," Sandra said, pretending it was a joke. "Sir, maybe she lied. She's a cleaner, she—" Ben lifted his hand. Silence fell again. Madame Sophia slowly began to pull off her red cleaner's gloves. Her fingers were old, but steady. Then she reached for the buttons of her blue cleaner's uniform. Sandra frowned, confused. "What are you doing?" Sandra asked, her voice rising. "You think you can just remove uniform in front of people?" Madame Sophia did not answer. She removed the uniform, one calm movement at a time. Underneath was a rich, expensive Ankara gown, neatly sewn, bright and elegant. The kind of Ankara that looked like wealth without shouting. The reception area went dead quiet. Madame Sophia stood up fully now. She wiped her tears, then she lifted her chin and her face changed. The weak, tired cleaner was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she had commanded respect her whole life. She looked at her son. Then she turned to Sandra, and her voice came out clear like a bell. "Ben," she said, "is this the kind of people you employ in your company? A bully with no empathy, no respect for the elderly?" Sandra's eyes widened so much they looked painful. Madame Sophia stepped forward, pointing at Sandra. "She insulted me," she said. "She mocked me, and she raised her leg to kick me like I was nothing." Ben's fists clenched. His breathing changed. He looked at Sandra like he was seeing her for the first time, like she was a stranger who had brought shame into his home. Then Ben spoke, voice low and heavy. "Andrew." At the mention of that name, the general manager, Andrew, who had been standing near the hallway, hurried forward with sweat on his forehead. "Yes, sir," Andrew replied quickly, almost stumbling. Ben did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Bring me her file," Ben said, pointing at Sandra. "Now." Sandra's pride finally broke. Her eyes darted around, looking for help. The staff members who usually laughed with her looked away. Her own friends avoided her eyes. The wet marble floor felt colder under Madame Sophia's feet, but she did not move. She just stood there, waiting. Ben stared at Sandra for a long moment. Then he said something that made Sandra's heart drop into her stomach. "Before today ends, you will regret what you did." Sandra swallowed hard, and in that moment, for the first time in her life, she felt fear, because the man standing in front of her was not just a boss. He was a son. And she had hurt his mother. And Ben Johnson looked ready to destroy her career with one word. The silence in the reception area felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Sandra stood where she was, frozen. Her expensive handbag slipped from her shoulder and dropped softly to the floor, but she did not even notice. Her eyes were locked on Ben Johnson's face. Andrew returned quickly, holding a brown file with shaking hands. "Sir," he said, bowing slightly, "this is her file." Ben took it without looking away from Sandra. He opened it slowly, too slowly. Sandra's heart pounded so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Ben flipped through the pages, her name, her position, her salary, her benefits. The official car assigned to her, the staff quarters in Victoria Island, all the things that once made her proud. Madame Sophia stood quietly beside her son, her hands folded in front of her. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried deep disappointment. Ben closed the file, then he turned to Andrew. "Andrew," he said, calm but firm, "what is our company policy on staff conduct?" Andrew swallowed. "No abuse of any kind, sir," he replied. "No harassment, no disrespect, especially toward the elderly." Ben nodded. "And what is the punishment?" Andrew hesitated for a second. "Immediate dismissal, sir," he said quietly. Sandra shook her head fast. "No, no, sir, please," she said, rushing forward. "It was a mistake. I was angry. She spoiled my dress. I didn't know—" Ben raised his hand again. "You didn't know she was my mother," he said. "Is that your excuse?" Sandra opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "So if she was just an ordinary cleaner," Ben continued, his voice sharp now, "it would be fine to insult her, to kick her." Sandra's lips trembled. "No, sir, I didn't mean—" "You meant it," Madame Sophia said softly. Everyone turned to her. "You meant every word," Madame Sophia continued, "because you thought no one important was watching." Sandra's legs began to shake. Andrew cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, "the sack letter is ready." He held out a white envelope. The sight of it broke something inside Sandra. She dropped to her knees, right there on the wet marble floor. Her knees landed in the foamy water with a splash. "Please," she cried, her voice loud and desperate. "Please, madam, please forgive me. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know." She crawled closer, reaching for Madame Sophia's feet. "I'm begging you," she sobbed. "Please talk to your son. I will change. I swear." Madame Sophia stepped back gently. Her face was not angry. It was sad. Stand up, she said quietly. Sandra shook her head. I can't, she cried. This job is my life. Please. Ben looked away. Andrew, he said, read it. Andrew unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. Dear Miss Sandra Williams, he began, his voice echoing in the hall, this letter serves as official notice of your immediate dismissal from Johnson Holdings due to gross misconduct, abuse, and violation of company values. Each word felt like a hammer on Sandra's heart. Ben took the letter and dropped it beside her on the floor. Your official car will be returned today, he said coldly. Security will escort you from the building. Sandra screamed, No, please, please. But no one moved to help her. The same people who once smiled at her now stared at the floor. Two security men stepped forward. Madame Sophia looked at Ben. Let her go, she said. She has heard enough. Ben nodded. Sandra was helped to her feet, still crying, still begging. As she was dragged away, she turned her head back one last time. Madame Sophia met her eyes, and for a moment Sandra saw something that hurt more than anger. Mercy she no longer deserved. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over Victoria Island. But there was no peace in Sandra's world. A black company car pulled up in front of the staff quarters. Two officials stepped out. Sandra stood at the door with a small box in her hands, her eyes red and swollen. Her neighbors watched from their balconies. Some whispered, some laughed quietly. The car that once brought her pride was taken away. The house that once made her feel important was no longer hers. By noon, Sandra had nowhere to go. That night, the room she rented was dark and silent. Sandra sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sack letter. Her phone buzzed. Messages, old colleagues, some mocking, some silent. She covered her ears. The shame felt too heavy. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. The kick, the words, the fall. Tears streamed down her face. I ruined everything, she whispered. She reached into her bag and brought out a small bottle. Her hand shook as she held it. I'm tired, she sobbed. I'm tired of fighting. She opened the bottle. Just as she lifted it, the door burst open. Sandra, Cynthia rushed in, her best friend. What are you doing? Cynthia shouted, but it was too late. Sandra collapsed. The bottle fell and rolled on the floor. Cynthia screamed for help. The hospital lights were bright and cold. Doctors rushed around Sandra's bed. She needs urgent surgery, one doctor said. 10 million naira. Cynthia's heart dropped. She had nothing. She stood in the hallway, shaking. Then she remembered something. She took out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. Hello? A calm voice answered. Sir, this is Cynthia, she said, crying. Please, Sandra is dying. There was silence. Then, where are you? Ben Johnson asked. Cynthia froze. He hung up. Minutes later, a convoy pulled into the hospital. Doctors stood straighter. Nurses whispered. Ben Johnson stepped out. His face was serious. Take me to her, he said. And as he walked toward the emergency room, Cynthia watched in disbelief. Because the man Sandra humiliated was the same man coming to save her life. The smell of disinfectant filled the hospital corridor. Cynthia stood near the emergency room door, her back pressed against the cold wall, her hands clasped tightly together like she was praying without words. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her heart beat so fast it hurt. Ben Johnson stood a few steps away. Quiet. Still, too calm for someone whose mother had been insulted and whose staff had almost ended her own life. The red light above the emergency room door stayed on. A nurse walked in and out quickly. Doctors whispered in low voices, 10 million naira. The words kept ringing in Cynthia's head. She turned slowly to Ben and fell on her knees. Sir, please, she cried. I know she did wrong, I know, but she's all I have. Please don't let her die. Ben looked down at her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sighed. Stand up, he said gently. Cynthia shook her head. I can't, she sobbed. I don't have that kind of money. We grew up together. She's like my sister. Ben bent down slightly and helped her up. You don't need to beg, he said. I already told them to prepare the theatre. Cynthia froze. You did? She asked, her voice breaking. Ben nodded. The money has been paid, he said simply. Cynthia covered her mouth with both hands. Tears rushed down again, this time mixed with shock. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything she did, why would you help her?" Ben did not answer immediately. He turned his face toward the glass window that showed part of the emergency room. Through it, Sandra's body could be seen, still and pale, machines beeping softly around her. "She is wrong," Ben finally said, "but death is not a lesson I want to teach." Cynthia nodded slowly, crying quietly. Hours passed. The night grew deeper. Then, finally, the red light went off. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask. "The surgery was successful," he said. "She will live." Cynthia screamed with relief and hugged the doctor without thinking. Ben nodded once. "Thank you," he said. The doctor bowed slightly and walked away. Sandra was moved into a private recovery room. Cynthia followed closely. Ben stayed back for a moment. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Andrew," he said, "I need you to come to the hospital. Now." Sandra woke up slowly. Her eyes fluttered open. The room was quiet, white and clean. She tried to move but felt pain shoot through her body. She groaned softly. Cynthia rushed to her side. "Sandra, thank God," she cried, holding her hand. Sandra blinked. "Cynthia," she whispered, "am I dead?" "No," Cynthia laughed through tears. "You're alive. You scared me." Sandra swallowed. Her memory returned like a flood. The sack letter, the staff quarters, the shame, the bottle. She turned her head away. "I failed," she whispered. "I couldn't even die properly." Cynthia squeezed her hand. "Don't talk like that," she said softly. "Someone saved you." Sandra frowned weakly. "Who?" she asked. Cynthia hesitated, then she said the name. "Ben Johnson." Sandra froze, her eyes widened slowly. "What?" she croaked. "He paid for everything," Cynthia continued. "The surgery, the room, everything." Sandra's breathing became uneven. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. He hates me. I hurt his mother." Cynthia shook her head. "He still came," she said. Sandra turned her face to the ceiling. Tears rolled down the sides of her eyes and soaked into the pillow. "I don't deserve this," she cried quietly. "I don't deserve to live." The door opened softly. Both women turned. Ben walked in. Behind him was Andrew. Sandra's heart skipped. She tried to sit up but cried out in pain. "Don't move," Ben said calmly. "Lie down." Sandra stared at him like she was seeing a ghost. "You," she whispered. "Why are you here?" Ben pulled a chair and sat beside her bed. "I came to check if you survived," he said. Sandra turned her face away, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry for everything. I was foolish. I was wicked. I don't even know why I became like that." Ben watched her quietly. "Andrew," he said, "tell her." Andrew stepped forward slowly. "Sandra," he said gently, "we looked into your file, deeper this time." Sandra frowned weakly. "What do you mean?" she asked. Andrew cleared his throat. "We found out you are an orphan," he said. "Both parents died 15 years ago. You trained yourself through school. You worked hard to survive." Sandra's lips trembled. Ben continued. "You climbed from nothing," he said. "And somewhere along the way, you became afraid of going back to nothing." Sandra began to cry, openly. "Yes," she sobbed. "I was scared. I didn't want to be small again. I thought power would protect me." Ben nodded slowly. "But power without kindness becomes cruelty," he said. Sandra covered her face. "I hurt the wrong person," she cried. "I hurt your mother." Ben stood up. "My mother will decide what happens next," he said. Sandra's crying stopped. Her heart pounded again. "Madam Sophia." The thought alone made her chest tight. Ben turned toward the door. "I will bring her when you are stronger," he said. Sandra watched him leave. Fear and hope battled inside her, because the woman she humiliated was now the only one who could decide her future, and Sandra did not know if forgiveness was still possible. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet. Sandra lay on the bed, staring at the white ceiling, listening to the slow beeping of the machine beside her. Each sound reminded her that she was still alive. Alive because of a man she had deeply wronged. Her hands rested on her stomach, thin and weak. Her mind would not rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The kick, the fall, the wet marble floor, the tears on Madame Sophia's face. Sandra swallowed hard. I wish I could take it back, she whispered to herself. The door opened softly. Sandra turned her head slowly, expecting Cynthia. But it was not Cynthia. It was Madame Sophia. She walked in quietly, dressed simply but beautifully. Her hair was neatly covered with a light scarf. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were deep, full of wisdom and pain. Behind her was Ben. Sandra's heart almost stopped. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her body. She cried out softly. Please, don't move, Madame Sophia said gently, raising her hand. Sandra froze. That voice, the same voice she had mocked, the same voice she had ignored. Now it sounded strong and kind. Madame Sophia stepped closer to the bed. Ben stood back, giving them space. Sandra's hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Madame Sophia did not speak immediately. She pulled a chair and sat beside the bed. She looked at Sandra for a long moment, not with anger, not with pride, but with sadness. Why? Madame Sophia finally asked. Sandra's lips trembled. Why did you treat me that way? Madame Sophia continued softly. What did I do to deserve that pain? Sandra broke. She began to cry deeply, hard sobs that shook her weak body. I don't know, she cried. I was angry at life. I was angry at my past. And when I saw you, I felt powerful for the first time. Madame Sophia listened. She did not interrupt. Sandra wiped her face weakly. I lost my parents, she continued. I grew up alone. I promised myself I would never be poor again. I told myself I would never be small again. Her voice cracked. But I became cruel, she sobbed. I became someone I hate. Madame Sophia nodded slowly. Pain can make people hard, she said, but it does not give us the right to break others. Sandra looked up at her with red eyes. I deserve whatever you decide, she said. I know I cannot work in your company again. I know my life is ruined. Madame Sophia sighed. She stood up slowly. Sandra's heart sank. This was it, she thought. Judgment. Madame Sophia turned and walked toward the window, her hands behind her back. Ben watched quietly. The silence felt heavy. Then Madame Sophia spoke again. When I wore that cleaner's uniform, she said calmly, I wanted to see something. Sandra frowned weakly. I wanted to see how people treat those they think are nothing. Madame Sophia continued, I wanted to see if kindness still lived in this place. Sandra's tears returned. I failed that test, she whispered. Yes, Madame Sophia said gently. You did. Sandra closed her eyes. I accept it, she said. Please, forgive me if you can. But if you cannot, I understand. Madame Sophia turned back toward her. Her eyes softened. I have lived long enough to know something, she said. People who grow up without love often forget how to give it. Sandra opened her eyes slowly. Madame Sophia stepped closer again. But love can still be learned, she added. Sandra's heart began to race. Madame Sophia placed her hand gently on Sandra's arm. I forgive you, she said. Sandra gasped. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. You forgive me, she whispered. Madame Sophia nodded. Yes, she said, not because what you did was small, but because hatred will only destroy us both. Sandra began to cry again, this time louder. She reached for Madame Sophia's hand and held it tightly. Thank you, she cried. Thank you. I don't deserve this. Madame Sophia smiled faintly. Forgiveness is not about what you deserve, she said. It is about what we choose. Ben stepped forward. Mum, he said quietly, are you sure? Madame Sophia looked at her son. Yes, she said, but forgiveness does not remove consequences. Sandra stiffened. Madame Sophia turned back to her. You will still face the results of your actions, she said. But you will not face them alone. Sandra nodded quickly. I understand, she said. I will accept anything. Madame Sophia looked at Ben. Bring her to the house after she is discharged, she said. She needs guidance, not rejection. Ben looked surprised. Our house? He asked. Yes, Madame Sophia replied. If she goes back to the world the same way, she may fall again. Sandra could not believe what she was hearing. You would take me in? She asked in disbelief. Madame Sophia smiled gently. For a season, she said, until you learn who you truly are. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand. Tears poured freely. I promise, she cried. I will change. I swear. Madame Sophia squeezed her hand lightly. Change is not sworn, she said. It is shown. 2 days later, Sandra was discharged. A black car waited outside the hospital. Not a company car, a family car. Sandra sat quietly in the back seat, dressed simply, her head bowed. She felt small again, but this time it felt different. The gates of Ben's mansion opened slowly. She stared out the window in shock. The house was large, peaceful, and beautiful. This was the home of the woman she once kicked. As the car stopped, Sandra's heart beat fast, because she was stepping into a place she never imagined. Not as a boss, not as a proud woman, but as someone starting over. And Sandra did not know what awaited her inside that house, but one thing was clear: her life was no longer the same. The gates of Ben Johnson's mansion closed slowly behind the car. Sandra sat quietly in the back seat, her hands folded on her lap, her head lowered. The soft hum of the engine felt loud in her ears. Her heart beat fast, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Hope mixed with shame. The car stopped. The driver stepped out and opened the door. "Madam," he said politely. Sandra flinched at the word. She stepped out slowly. The house stood tall and calm, surrounded by green lawns and flowers that smelled fresh and clean. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone like her who once lived with anger in her heart. Madame Sophia stepped out of the house to meet her. She was dressed simply, wearing a soft-colored gown and flat shoes. No gold, no pride, just grace. "Welcome," Madame Sophia said warmly. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She dropped her small bag and fell to her knees. "I don't deserve to be here," she cried. "I don't deserve your kindness." Madame Sophia quickly bent down and lifted her. "Stand up," she said gently. "This is not a place for kneeling. This is a place for learning." Sandra stood, shaking. Ben watched from a distance, his arms folded. He said nothing, but his eyes followed every move. The first few days were not easy. Sandra woke up early every morning, not because anyone forced her, but because guilt would not let her sleep. She helped in the kitchen. She cleaned without being asked. She greeted everyone politely, even the youngest staff. She spoke little and listened more. At night she cried quietly in her room, thinking of who she used to be. Madame Sophia watched her closely. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She taught. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Madame Sophia spoke. "Power is not given to make others afraid," she said calmly. "It is given to make life better for others." Sandra nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand. Now," she said softly, "I used power to hide my pain." Madame Sophia smiled. "Pain does not heal by hurting others," she replied. 2 weeks later, Ben called Sandra into his study. Her hands shook as she stood before him. "Sit," Ben said. She obeyed. Ben studied her quietly. "You almost destroyed your life," he said finally. "Yes, sir," Sandra replied. "But you also survived," he continued, "and survival comes with responsibility." Sandra nodded. "I am ready," she said, "even if it is to leave quietly." Ben leaned back. "My mother forgave you," he said. "That is not something I take lightly." Sandra held her breath. "I will reinstate you," Ben continued slowly, "but not in the same position." Sandra's eyes widened. "You will start again," he said. "Lower role, lower pay. No special privileges." Sandra stood up immediately. "Thank you," she said quickly. "I accept anything." Ben raised his hand. "There is one more thing," he added. She froze. "You will work directly under my mother," Ben said, "learning humility, patience, and service." Sandra's knees almost gave way. "I will do my best," she said, her voice breaking. Ben nodded. "Don't disappoint her," he said. The news spread through the company like wildfire. Sandra was back, but she was not the same. She greeted cleaners by name. She helped old staff carry files. She apologized to people she once ignored. Some laughed behind her back. Some doubted her change. But she did not complain. She remembered the wet marble floor, she remembered the kick, and she remembered Mercy. Madame Sophia visited the office often, this time not in a cleaner's uniform, but as the CEO's mother. Staff trembled when they saw her, but she only smiled. One afternoon, Madame Sophia stood in the same reception area where everything happened. The marble floor shined again. Sandra stood beside her. "Do you remember this place?" Madame Sophia asked. "Yes," Sandra replied quietly. "This is where your life broke," Madame Sophia said, "and where it began again." Sandra nodded, tears forming. "Never forget," Madame Sophia added, "because forgetting is how pride returns." "I won't," Sandra promised. Months passed. Sandra changed completely. She became known for kindness, for patience, for respect. Even those who once mocked her began to admire her. One day, during a company event, Ben stood on stage. "There is someone I want to speak about," he said. The hall became quiet. Sandra's heart raced. "This company believes in discipline," Ben continued, "but it also believes in growth." He looked directly at Sandra. "There is a staff member here who fell badly," he said, "but she stood up better." People murmured. Ben smiled slightly. "Sandra Williams," he said, "step forward." Sandra walked slowly to the stage, her legs weak. Ben turned to his mother. "Mom," he said, "thank you for teaching me that kindness can correct what punishment cannot." Madame Sophia smiled. Sandra broke into tears. She bowed slightly. "I was given a second chance," Sandra said to the crowd, "and I will spend my life proving it was not wasted." The hall filled with applause. That evening, as Sandra stood alone by the window, she whispered softly, "I almost ended it all. But kindness saved me." Madame Sophia walked up behind her. "Kindness always saves," she said. Sandra turned and smiled through tears. "I will never forget," she said, and this time she meant it. If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.